This is the Italian Real Estate Podcast, here to help you with the ins and outs and basics of Italian real estate, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Italian Real Estate Podcast, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. We, of course, are back here with Italian attorney Marco Permunian to talk a bit more about Italian real estate. Hello there and welcome, Marco. How you doing?
Thank you. Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And today, Marco and I wanted to have a quick chit-chat about some of the differences and maybe even some of the similarities as time goes on between real estate and house hunting here in Italy versus in the United States, and maybe even touch on some different aspects of life, because there's a lot that you will find that will just feel foreign, and that it's worthwhile to be aware of some of the differences in the systems, just because making an assumption that things will work the same way in the United States, unfortunately for many people, can trip them up. And of course, this is one of the reasons why Marco and his team are around, so that they can help people during this process to simplify it for them. And so, Marco, I know also you spend time in the States, and just taking into account your experience there versus living here in Italy, has there been anything in the United States that you've found to be surprising about how things work over there, that maybe might be so different that coming from the opposite direction might be surprising for somebody coming to Italy?
I think the process of renting an apartment is, speaking about real estate, is really different in Italy versus the US. And maybe you can help me out with some aspects of renting in America. But the thing that probably is the most shocking for an American is for how long you rent in Italy, because most people in Italy, they rent for a long term. It's actually uncommon for somebody who lives in Italy to rent short term. And as we said in other videos, the average duration of a rental agreement in Italy is 3 plus 2 years or 4 plus 4, which means that normally the duration of your rental agreement is going to be at least 3 years, which means that you can't terminate the agreement before the 3 years have passed unless you give a notice, which for most contracts is 6 months.
So yeah, that's the really big kicker for so many Americans coming to Italy. It's like it's I don't even know what I'm going to be doing a week from now, let alone in 6 months from now. No, but I mean, also, jokes aside, I know what I'm doing tomorrow, and pretty good idea in 6 months. But practically speaking, to try and organize a move over that longer term, actually in Italy, now that I think about it as I'm saying this, it does make sense, because moving within Italy is, I don't want to say more complicated, but it feels like there's more that needs to be involved, and it's not as easy and straightforward as in the States. Yeah, there are companies where you can go and rent a van, for example, or you can hire a moving company. But generally, it's much more expensive to do that here, at least in my experience and the prices I've been quoted, than doing it in the States. But, I mean, back in the U.S., it's not uncommon to hear of a 1-month termination notice. Or maybe if you're going from month to month, then maybe a week, 2 weeks potentially, or you just let it lapse and you just leave when you have to get out of the apartment, because that's another thing that you don't really see here that was very surprising, and that I had a very difficult time with when I first arrived, because what I was really hoping to find was something that I could get maybe month to month. I knew actually at that time, I had already known that it didn't exist. I still wanted it anyway, but I wanted that month to month agreement so that I could find the next step, have a place to land, to arrive, that I know I can have a bed to sleep in, a kitchen to eat in, and so on. And then from there, go on to the apartment that I would be living in more permanently, or at least on a longer term basis.
Yeah, but and we were talking about this before recording this episode, that probably this has to do also with the mentality. The difference is in the mentality. Americans, they move a lot from one place to the other. It's absolutely not uncommon for an American to move from New York to Los Angeles, or work from
I mean, it's
from
very
one
rare.
day to another.
No, it's very rare that like you end up staying in the town where you grew up. I mean, plenty of people do it, but you find a lot of people that go all over the place, and maybe your high school friends are spread out all around the country, and maybe you only see each other once every few years or so because your lives have gone in such different directions because of the locations. And Americans are much more mobile, and something even you were talking about in our little conversation ahead of time was about how in Italy, how people tend to stay where they're from, and maybe if they move, like they stay within their region or ideally within the same town that they grew up in.
Absolutely. It's very uncommon for Italians to move from one region to the other without a specific reason, at least. I know like most Americans, they just, it's not a big deal for them to just move to a completely different place just because there is like a better opportunity there, maybe a work opportunity. But in Italy, like you grow up in a town, and it's not uncommon to just live your whole life in the same town. And I guess this, has influenced also the way in which, for example, rental agreements are made. It's everything is more long-term in Italy, right? Because normally you settle in one place, you use a house for a long period of time.
Yeah, no, I mean, even just there's that idea of kind of settling more, not necessarily settling for anything less, but that you settle into a place, that the place where you live is where you will stay. I remember even you and I had a conversation a while back, was that it was uncommon, like if an Italian was going to move, they would move for like university, and then maybe they would stay in that university town, or they would end up coming back to their original town that they were from, because that's where their family is and that's where their support network is. And so I mean, of course, also we do see people who do move in Italy for work opportunities, but not from really so much the north to the south, really the other way around, where you'll see some people who do move from southern Italy to northern Italy because they feel there's maybe better opportunities, whereas maybe people from northern Italy might be more likely to leave the country rather than actually stay here if they are looking for a better work opportunity and they're going to be moving anyway. And then one other thing also that was interesting to me, like growing up in the States, I mean, sometimes we lived in apartment complexes, and there would be like a central office where they had the administration there, and if anything was wrong, you call them up, or if you want to go pay your rent, you go and you hand over the check. That's also a big thing, is checks are like almost unheard of here in Italy. Like it's
wire transfer.
Exactly. It's like an antiquated thing that's like, oh, how could you even think of that? You must be so old. But yeah, I mean, even also, I guess, maybe even the ability to pay cash, just straight up cash for your rent. Whereas here, that's definitely frowned upon.
Yeah, it would be like very uncommon for somebody to pay for their rent in cash.
Yeah, and I mean, even I think, isn't there some type of legislation against it, or it makes it like a person could get in trouble?
It has to do with that too. Yes, just there are some laws that like against like money laundering or tax evasion that makes it more convenient and safer for you to pay via wire transfer rather than in cash.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why, like most people, they don't pay not only for rent but also for the other things in cash.
No, and I mean that's something like I do like having that kind of record of like, hey, I paid my landlord this month. I can't come to me and say that I didn't pay anything because maybe they forgot something. But again, getting back to this kind of idea, living in like a complex, and you have like this giant plot of land and all these apartment buildings that are managed by one group. Whereas here in Italy, it's kind of like if you rent an apartment, it's really you're dealing with the owner of the apartment. Maybe a management company, but that management company won't be managing all of the building.
It's unusual, yes. Yeah. Yes, I think the closest thing would be like living in a condominium complex where there is like a property manager who, however, doesn't live within or doesn't operate, doesn't have an office within the complex. Normally, the property manager is somebody who has their own office somewhere else and also manages other condominium complexes.
Right.
And normally you don't really go to the property manager like on a regular basis, like for to complain about maybe noise that comes from the other apartment. Whereas in the US, you can go to this. We were talking about this before. This central office within the complex, and you can maybe complain about your neighbors. And
right, and like you have, I mean, if something goes wrong, something needs to be repaired. There's the management, the building management that you can go directly to. Whereas here, it's like maybe more. I mean, from what I've seen personally, like if there's something wrong with the building, like there's maybe the lights are not on in the hallway, or like the elevator isn't working, or there has to be some type of cleaning. Otherwise, you like practically never have any communication with the building manager.
Yes, you deal mostly with the owner of the unit, and if it is a major repair work, then the owner has to do it, or you do it and you get the money refunded by the owner. If it's something that has to do with the ordinary use, like daily use of the unit, then it's something that you are responsible for.
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, an example of this that I can give, a practical example, like the apartment that I live in, the oven died. Like all of a sudden it just didn't work. And it was an old oven. And when I moved into the apartment, it didn't fully function. And so I spoke to my landlord. And what we said, we came up with an agreement that I would, out of pocket, go to the store here locally because my landlord doesn't live in town. I would organize that, and then they would just reimburse me. And so that's the type of situation a person may run into. And maybe other places, of course, they could run into that same type of situation, like you're renting a standalone home in the US. But I feel also like here in Italy, it's almost much more common that people end up living in apartments rather than standalone homes. Yeah, people do, but it feels like a different lifestyle where a lot of people, it seems as though to me there's a lot of people who want to come into the cities and want to be in the centers of the cities, whereas in the States it's kind of like, how far can I get out into the country and have my space and have my place?
Absolutely. And also, like one thing that we were talking about before is maybe the complexity of even the rental process in Italy in comparison to the US. In the US, it's much more. It's much easier to even rent an apartment and quicker. You just maybe arrange quickly a contract that you can download right from like
just the internet
online.
Someplace,
yes. And you just fill it out, and that's your contract. In Italy, your contract is subject even to a registration with the public authorities. Yeah. It's a bigger deal.
No, it's huge. I mean, that was the thing that really surprised me when I came here. I was like, oh yeah, you have to pay tax on this contract. Like, excuse me? I have to pay taxes on an apartment that's not mine? Are you kidding me? And it's like, no, you're paying the taxes on the contract. I'm like, it's completely shocking to me. And even just the like, there are some back end aspects also that are simplified. For example, like the credit system in America, where you have a credit score and you just maybe sign a quick document to say that you are allowing them to go and check your credit, or that they can just quickly look it up online. Whereas here, that just doesn't exist, and you have to prove that you're able to pay in another way, or the landlord just has to trust you.
Exactly. Normally what they require, especially nowadays, is a work contract where you show how much you make and that you are able to pay the rent every month, especially because we're talking about like long-term contracts. And here in Italy, landlords, they're used to having people who stay in their apartment long-term for like 2, 3, 4 years. So they want to be sure that you will be paying the apartment for the apartment. And also because it's very difficult in Italy to evict somebody, you have to go to the courts. And so they want to be sure that they will not have to do so, that you will be able to pay your rent every month.
Yeah, there's a lot of protections for the renter here, and in various aspects. I mean, even like you were just saying about getting evicted, but other aspects as well, that there's a lot that is in and we've kind of briefly mentioned this in previous episodes, but there's a lot that's really in favor for the tenant rather than the landlord, or even the way that the contract is signed, like the simplicity, like you were just talking about. I mean, here, I've had the situation like that. I've been in a couple of different apartments, and it's been the same story every time, where it's like you go look at the apartment, you go see if it's the right apartment, then you talk with the landlord, and then maybe you're dealing with an agent or some intermediary, and they send you the contract, and you're like, no, I don't accept this contract. Can you make these changes? And then they send it back to you and say, no, we don't accept your changes, but we will come and there's a lot more negotiating room, I feel, in the contracts here. Even if maybe it's not the most common thing, but it seems much more common than what I have seen in the United States. And how long that process can be. I know there's been plenty of times in the States where you're living in a housing market where things are moving really fast paced, and you have to jump on the apartment. If you don't sign the agreement, the rental contract on the spot when you're looking at it, the next person who comes 30 minutes after you might get the apartment. Yeah. Or they'll be able to go through and have a selection of different people that they can go and choose from as a potential tenant in the apartment. But here in Italy, maybe because of how slow things move, it's not necessarily that you would lose out because you didn't sign it on the spot. You don't have the option to sign it on the spot. But maybe because the landlord actually wants to choose the person who they feel is the most appropriate for that apartment.
Absolutely.
But then also, actually, just quickly getting back to even what you were talking about, the building management. Something also that I have seen in Italy, more so in larger cities where they, in some buildings where they have a doorman, for example, that doorman will actually be there and not be the person who you contact about maintenance. Maybe in some buildings it could work that way, but it's really someone who's just there to check that nobody's coming into the apartment building that shouldn't be coming in there, or for deliveries, to take the deliveries in. And that can actually be not an expense per se, but an extra cost, not even a cost even, but more money that you do have to put out at the end of the year. I feel like I keep correcting myself here, because it's not that you have to, but what's expected of you in that situation is an end of the year bonus that you personally give in cash to the guy who mans the door. And there was one situation, I know of a friend who was living in an apartment building that had a doorman like that. And the landlord said, yeah, make sure that you give him 200 euros at the end of the year for Christmas. It's like, well, I don't own this apartment. Why am I giving him the 200 euros? And the next year they saw exactly why they should give him the 200 euros, because he started paying less attention to their packages, less attention to people coming to the door for them. And so there are these little things that can kind of come into play that maybe aren't the norm and not something that you see a lot, but can pop up. So rather than go on for too long, especially because we like to keep these episodes of the Italian Real Estate Podcast shorter than the Citizenship Podcast, and we focused a lot on renting here in Italy, I think it might be a good idea if in the future we do another episode on some of the differences when purchasing property here. We've talked about some of these things before, but I think it'd be good if we have a little bit more of a deep dive into this and talk about some of the social aspects as well, because there's some of the aspects that we deal with because that's what the law is. That's the way things work here. But it's all based on how things work here from a cultural perspective. But of course, if anybody is needing help to get their property here in Italy, find a place to live, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, italianrealestatelawyers.com, or they can give us a call. The number is on our website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more content like this about Italian real estate or even about Italian citizenship, make sure that you are subscribed to this YouTube channel and following the Italian Real Estate Lawyers Facebook page, as well as the Italian Citizenship Assistance Facebook page for updates about when this will be available as an audio-only podcast. And of course, if you are interested in learning more about life in Italy, living in Italy, and what things are like here as an Italian dual citizen expat, and you also want to see a little bit more about life in Italy, like actually going out and about, feel free to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, where I talk a lot about this and also get out from time to time to show you what Italy is really all about. And of course, we've been here with Italian attorney from ItalianRealEstatelawyers.com, Marco Permunian, and I am Rafael Di Furia. Thank you so much for joining us again. We will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.